statistics and research methods that he has to try to narrow down who this person is responsible for Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. What is your profile for who this suspect could be?
There is a house in Tucson, Arizona, that has stood in the same neighborhood since the 1970s. Decades of quiet mornings, decades of familiar streets, a life built slowly, carefully, the way most people build lives, through time, through routine, through the kind of ordinary stability that makes a place feel permanent. Nancy Guthrie lived there. She was not a public figure. She was not someone whose name appeared in headlines or whose face was recognized in grocery stores. She was a mother, a woman who had spent her life in that Tucson home long before her daughter became one of the most recognized faces on American television.
According to reporting tied to the investigation, that hired vehicle may have provided one of the final, independently documented recordings of Nancy alive, physically stable, and behaviorally calm. Federal agents reportedly reviewed that footage, and what makes this so disturbing is not what the video allegedly showed, but what it didn't.
Long before Savannah Guthrie sat in front of millions of people every morning on the Today Show. Long before any of that, Nancy was simply there, in that house, in that neighborhood, living a life that felt entirely removed from the kind of attention that would eventually find her. And then February 1st happened. At 2:28 in the morning, a doorbell camera recorded something that would change everything. A figure appeared at Nancy Guthrie's property, masked, gloved, moving with a deliberateness that did not belong to the hour. A backpack, measured steps, the kind of stillness in the body that does not come from nervousness.
Yeah, Trim and Troy, good afternoon to you both. You may remember Friday night. This was a big night in this investigation when very late at night, law enforcement were executing a search warrant here in the Catalina Foothills area. It was this home just over my shoulder. It's only about 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's own home. They were also taking a pretty close look at a Range Rover that was parked at a Culver's just a couple of miles away from here as well.
It comes from preparation. That footage became the center of everything. Law enforcement built around it. The media reported around it. A reward that would climb past $1,200,000 was designed specifically to bring that person forward. And the public, millions of people who had followed this case from the beginning, fixed their eyes on that same masked face, studying it, searching it, trying to find inside it some explanation for what had happened to Nancy Guthrie. For 3 months, that was the investigation. Find the man on the porch. Find the answer. It was not an unreasonable assumption. He was the only visible actor in a crime that left almost nothing else behind. The backpack, the gloves, the mask, the controlled, deliberate movements across her property in the dead of night. Everything the cameras caught pointed inward, toward him. He was the target. He was the face on the wanted posters. He was the reason the reward existed. 3 months, one face, one assumption, high viewers. Here is a question, and the answer could change how you see this entire case. Do you think the man on Nancy Guthrie's porch was working alone, or do you believe someone sent him?
There is a moment in every investigation when everything changes. Not because of one dramatic discovery, not because of a single piece of evidence, but because the story someone has been telling stops matching the facts.
Drop your answer in the comments right now. Because on May 6th, the woman who spent her career building the science of criminal profiling looked at that footage and said something that 3 months of public coverage had not been willing to say out loud. The man on that porch may already be dead, not hiding, not running, not sitting somewhere waiting to be found by a tip that finally lands in the right hands. Dead, possibly removed by the same person who put him at that door in the first place. Let that settle for a moment. The only face this investigation had carried for 90 days. The subject of the largest reward in this case's history. The person that millions of people had been studying, sketching, analyzing frame by frame, may no longer exist to be found. Dr. Ann Burgess said it directly. Her name carries weight that cannot be overstated in the world of criminal investigation. She did not stumble into prominence. She built it. Her research on violent criminal behavior, conducted alongside the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, became the foundation for how law enforcement profiles the most dangerous offenders in the country. When she speaks about the psychology of crime, investigators listen. Courtrooms listen. The entire architecture of modern criminal profiling exists in large part because of the work she did. And on May 6th, She looked at this case and said the masked figure on Nancy Guthrie's porch did not act alone. Brian Entin pressed her. He asked the question directly, the way a journalist does when they sense the answer is larger than the words being used. He asked whether she meant Porch Guy could be dead. She confirmed it. He asked if that meant killed by whoever sent him. By the boss. She confirmed that too. The room the world had been searching for just collapsed inward. Every assumption, every headline, every shared image of that masked figure. All of it had been focused on the outer edge of something much larger. Something that was never designed to be seen. Something that had been watching this entire investigation from a place no camera had reached, no reward had touched, no tip had uncovered. The man on the porch was never the center of this story. He was always the part that was meant to be found. And the part that mattered, the part that planned, directed, and ultimately decided what happened on February 1st, stayed perfectly invisible while the world looked the other way. There is a specific kind of person who plans a crime like this. They do not act in the moment. They do not react out of anger or desperation or the kind of impulsive decision-making that leaves obvious traces behind. They think, they observe, they construct, and when the time comes to move, they do not move themselves. They send someone else, someone expendable, someone whose face can appear on a wanted poster while the architect of the entire plan watches from a comfortable distance, in an ordinary life, surrounded by people who would never believe what they were capable of. Dr. Gary Brucato had a word for that structure. A spiderweb. And that image is not decorative language. It is a precise architectural description of how this crime was built. A spiderweb has a very specific design. The outer threads are the most visible. They are exposed. They are the part that catches things, holds things temporarily, the part that anyone passing by can see. But the outer threads are not where the spider lives. The spider lives at the center. Still, patient, connected to every single thread, never directly visible from the outside, aware of everything, touched by nothing. The man at Nancy Guthrie's door was an outer thread. Visible, exposed, captured on camera, and if Dr. Ann Burgess is right, already gone. Removed not by law enforcement closing in, but by the center of the web itself, making a calculated decision the moment the outer layer became a liability. Think about what that decision requires. It requires someone who looked at a situation where the entire country was searching for one person and concluded that the safest move was elimination. Not because they panicked, because they calculated, because the math of exposure led them to one answer and they followed it without hesitation. That is not the behavior of someone who stumbled into this. That is the behavior of someone who understood from the very beginning that every piece of this plan was disposable, including the person they used to carry it out. Dr. Brucato called the person at the center a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that phrase deserves more than a moment. Because it is not drama. It is not exaggeration for the sake of a headline. It is a precise behavioral description of someone whose entire existence in public life has been constructed around appearing to be something they are not. A wolf in sheep's clothing does not look dangerous. That is the whole point. That is the entire mechanism of how they move through the world undetected. They look like someone you would trust. Someone whose name, if it appeared on a list of suspects, would make the people around them say that cannot be right. That is not possible. I know that person. And that is exactly what the wolf counts on. Every ordinary interaction, every unremarkable morning, every conversation that looked like nothing at all of it is armor. Carefully maintained, deliberately constructed armor that has kept them invisible for 3 months while the world directed its energy at a masked figure on a doorbell camera who may no longer be alive. That is the weight of what Burgess and Brucato said on May 6th. Not a theory, not speculation. A behavioral conclusion drawn from decades of studying how people like this operate, how they construct their cover, and how they move when the pressure begins to build. The outer thread was always going to be sacrificed. It was designed that way from the start. What was never designed, what the boss could not fully control, was what came after. Because removing someone does not make the evidence they left behind disappear. It does not reach back in time and pull a hair from a crime scene. It does not erase a doorbell camera recording or undo 3 months of federal analysis. The outer thread is gone. But the web is still there. And every thread still leads to the same place. Now comes the question that cuts deepest in this entire case. The question that Dr. Casey Jordan answered on May 6th and that most coverage has not fully sat with yet. How did the boss get close enough to plan this? Because planning a crime at this level of specificity requires knowledge that cannot be found online.
But on the night of January 31st, 2026, that silence was weaponized.
It requires the kind of detail that only comes from time spent in or around a specific environment. The layout of Nancy Guthrie's home, her daily routine, her schedule, the fact that she lived alone, the specific entry points on her property, the patterns of her life that could be studied, mapped, and eventually used. That is not information you assemble from a distance. That is information you gather through access, through proximity, through moments that felt completely ordinary to Nancy and completely purposeful to the person observing them. Jordan identified the category of person who would have that access without ever triggering suspicion. Changes in how they carry themselves in ordinary conversation. Reactions that do not match the situation when this case comes up, too controlled or not controlled enough. A response that is slightly off in a way that is hard to name but impossible to fully ignore. A distance that was not there before January 31st. A tension that lives just below the surface of their daily life, present in the small moments, the unguarded ones, the seconds between sentences when the performance slips just far enough to show something underneath. The people closest to the boss have seen it. They may not have named it yet. They may have explained it away, given it a different reason, told themselves it was stress or exhaustion or something ordinary that would eventually pass. But the behavioral profile that Clemente described is specific enough that when someone in that circle hears it laid out this way, something is going to connect. And here is the layer that almost no coverage has been willing to examine directly. If Porch Guy is already gone, if that decision was made, then the people closest to the boss did not just observe behavioral changes. They may have experienced a shift that goes beyond tension and distance. Something more significant entered that immediate world. And significant things leave marks on the people nearby, marks that show up in exactly the kind of ways that trained investigators know how to read. The boss did not just make one decision on February 1st. They may have made a second one. And the second one is the one that closes the distance between them and everything they have spent 3 months trying to outrun. Now comes the piece of this case that most people do not fully understand. The piece that explains why the investigation appeared to stall. Why 3 months passed without a named suspect, without a public arrest, without the kind of momentum that a case this visible should have generated almost immediately. The answer is institutional. Brian Entin confirmed it on the record. In the early weeks of this investigation, the Pima County Sheriff's Department was not fully sharing evidence with the FBI. Information that should have been in federal hands during the most critical window of any investigation, the first days, the first weeks, the period when evidence is freshest and behavioral trails are still warm, was not transferred. It sat, it waited, it aged inside a process that was not built for the scale of what this case required. And it got worse. Leadership changes within the sheriff's office placed less experienced personnel in control during exactly the period when this investigation needed its sharpest minds making its most important decisions. The people responsible for steering the case through its most consequential early phase were not the people best equipped to do it. A forensics professor who reviewed this case publicly stated that it would be taught in classrooms for years. Not as a model of excellence. As an example of what not to do. Every day that evidence sat in a private Florida laboratory instead of an FBI facility was a day the threads were not being pulled. Every day the Pima County Sheriff's Department operated in a closed loop instead of a coordinated federal partnership was a day the boss moved through the world with a confidence that the situation no longer deserved to provide them. That confidence was borrowed. It was built on a delay that was never supposed to happen, sustained by an institutional failure that had nothing to do with the boss's planning and everything to do with a system that was not functioning the way it was designed to. And the boss, whether they understood the mechanics of it consciously or simply felt the absence of pressure in their daily life, moved through that window as though it would stay open. It did not stay open. The DNA collected at Nancy Guthrie's home, including a hair sample recovered from the scene, has been transferred to the FBI laboratory. Not a county facility. Not a private lab operating on a timeline nobody was supervising. The FBI, federal resources, advanced forensic technology that did not exist in its current form even 5 years ago. A team with the analytical capability to work backward from a single biological sample and build a case that holds in any courtroom in this country. The coordination between the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI has been resolved. The evidence is where it needs to be. And the boss cannot reach into a federal laboratory and reclaim what is already inside it. That option closed the moment the transfer was made. Whatever advantage the delay provided, whatever breathing room the institutional failure quietly created, it is gone. The window the boss moved through for 3 months is shut. What is left is the evidence, the profile, the federal resources, and time, and the FBI has an unlimited supply of the last one. 3 months of institutional delay, 1 transferred hair sample, and a behavioral profile so complete that the investigators now working this case do not just understand what the boss did. They understand how the boss thinks, where they feel safest, where they are most likely to fracture under sustained pressure. Specific is what catches people. And this profile is specific. There is something that most people miss about a person who carries a secret this large through an ordinary life.
Because the man on Nancy's porch at 1:47 a.m. had a walk, too. And within hours, side-by-side comparisons were everywhere. The gait, the shoulder roll, the stride length. Thousands of people watching 2 clips on a loop asking the same question. Is that the same person? I am not here to answer that question with a TikTok overlay. I am here to show you something bigger.
They are not calm. They appear calm. There is a difference between those 2 things that is almost impossible to see from the outside but impossible to ignore from the inside. The performance of normalcy is one of the most exhausting things a human being can sustain. Every conversation about this case requires a measured reaction. Every news alert requires a controlled response. Every person who mentions Nancy Guthrie's name in passing, every coworker who brings up the reward, every moment where this investigation surfaces in the ordinary flow of daily life, all of it requires the boss to perform the response of someone who has nothing to hide. 3 months of that performance. 3 months of calibrating every reaction. 3 months of maintaining the face, the routine, the version of themselves that the people around them have always known. And underneath all of it, the weight of everything that happened on February 1st, the weight of whatever decision may have come after, pressing down on a person who was never built to carry it permanently. Dr. Ann Burgess built the science that identified and helped bring to justice some of the most dangerous people in American criminal history. Her work did not just create a theory of criminal behavior. It created a map of how people like the boss think, how they move, what they protect, and critically, where they crack. When she looks at a case and points in a direction, that direction does not stay empty. Dr. Gary Brucato saw a spiderweb. Every thread accounted for, every connection mapped, an architecture that was designed to protect its center. But webs are not indestructible. They are precise, and precision has a vulnerability. When you understand the structure, you know exactly where to apply pressure. Dr. Casey Jordan identified the access point, the ordinary role, the invisible presence, the face that passed through Nancy Guthrie's world without leaving an impression, except on a federal forensic record that is now being read by people with the resources and the mandate to follow it wherever it leads. Robert Clemente described the cracks already forming in the daily life of the person at the center. The behavioral tells are already there, already visible to the people in that immediate circle who have not yet understood what they are seeing. And to anyone watching this who has noticed something, a shift in someone close to them that started around the end of January and never fully resolved, a reaction to this case that felt slightly wrong, a distance that appeared without explanation and has not gone away, the FBI needs to hear from you. Submit a tip directly through tips.fbi.gov. Contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department. The reward in this case is over $1,200,000. It remains unclaimed. That money exists for exactly this moment. When one person connects one detail to one observation and understands what they have been sitting on. Nancy Guthrie left a family dinner on January 31st Street. She did not come home. For 3 months, the world looked at one face on one camera and believed that finding that face would find the answer. But the answer was never in the footage. It was always behind it. In someone who planned from a distance, executed through someone else, and when the exposure became too great, made a decision that only a person with something enormous to protect would make. And in making that decision, they did not sever the connection to what happened. They deepened it. The hair was already collected. The footage was already analyzed. The profilers had already traced the edges of the web. And every thread, every single one, leads to the same center. The boss is still there. Still performing. Still watching this investigation from the inside, hoping the coverage fades, hoping the threads stop before they reach the place where they all converge. Dr. Ann Burgess is not stopping. The FBI is not stopping. And in the next video, something shifts in this case that changes the direction of the entire investigation. A detail that has been sitting in plain sight for 3 months is about to be seen differently. And when it is, the distance between the outer edge of this web and its center becomes very small. If you are not subscribed, do it now. Because the moment this case moves, you need to already be here.